Oh, hello. My name is Christine Adams, and I am a professor here at Universidad del Norte. I teach for the Instituto de Idiomas, and I teach business English, level 5 and 7. I also teach academic writing for the Especialización program in Santa Marta. It's like the first year for the master's program. And if the students continue on after that first year, they go on to the master's program. So yes, welcome to my presentation. I'm going to be talking about project-based learning. And yes, welcome. Okay, so project-based learning is it's not a very new method, but it is definitely a creative and innovative method for teaching a language in a classroom. And I say a language because it doesn't necessarily have to be English. It can be English or any second, third language that you teach. So what I'm going to be talking about today are the tenets of project-based learning, so kind of where it began, but a brief overview because I want to focus mostly on what is project-based learning. And then we're going to talk about, the traditional versus project-based learning, what a traditional classroom looks like versus what a project-based learning classroom might look like. And then also some considerations for project-based learning, and then the major features of PBL in detail. So as I go, if you have questions, I encourage you to write them in the chat, and I'll give space at the end of the presentation for questions at the very end. So what is project-based learning, the basics? So Grant 2002 mentioned these concepts when referring to project-based learning. Learning by doing. It's basically allowing the students to not just see and hear and learn things in a normal way, but also by doing it, giving them the opportunity to do something with the language and really use it. Interaction is a key to knowledge construction. If they're not able to interact, then they're not going to be able to use this knowledge and put it to good use, basically. The other thing that to keep in mind is that people take different paths. So when you have 22 students, and that's, I guess, on the small side, depending on the types of classrooms that you have, having 22 students in your classroom, you have to keep in mind that each student is unique and individual. And when you have larger classrooms, it can be difficult to really allow for students to grow in the way that they need to. But with project-based learning, it really allows you the opportunity to think about how each student is going to be different and how they will learn at their own pace and be able to do things at different times. And through this interaction with their peers, with the materials, with the outside world, depending on the project, they're going to gain confidence and knowledge in this ability. The other thing is the learning takes place through investigations, activities, and conversation. And I got it. Yeah. The learning takes place through investigations, activities, and conversations. So it's not just about what they see on the board or what you're introducing to them, but it's also coming from their peers. They are able to construct new knowledge on the old knowledge, maybe something you've introduced in a previous class, or maybe just something that they've done in a previous course with another teacher. They'll be able to bring that into the classroom and use it. They'll also be investigating and doing different activities. And then the last thing, as I mentioned earlier, is building new knowledge on old knowledge. So what this all comes down to, and I like this quote by John Thomas, project-based learning consists of complex tasks based on challenging questions or problems that involve students in design, problem solving, decision-making, or investigative activities. It gives students the opportunity to work relatively autonomously over extended periods of time and culminate in realistic products or presentations. So the essence of this quote is what project-based is about. It's not just a one-off task that happens one time, and it's not just about the product that's at the end. It's about the process and the way the students achieve these goals. And for project-based learning, the process is really emphasized. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of different models. So project-based learning is also considered the experiential method, or an experiential method, I should say. And it's very cyclical. It doesn't just go in a linear fashion. It happens in circles. So you might present something, they might work on it, they might finish with it, but then they might circle back. So it's never going to be just you do an activity, you test it, and then you're done with it. All these things are interconnected. And with project-based learning, it helps them think about how things connect. And as a teacher using project-based learning, it helps you explain things in a different way so that students can make more meaningful connections to what you are presenting to them. So they experience, imagine, reflect, analyze, think, decide, act, and initiate, all while balancing these things, because no one thing takes precedence over the other. But at different points in their learning and throughout the project, they'll be experiencing each of these in its own turn. So I just wanted to show you kind of the difference between the traditional, I guess, model, what would be termed the traditional model of teaching, versus how a project-based learning classroom might look. So if you look at the top slide, at the top of the slide, the traditional unit with a culmination project, you follow a very linear fashion. It's lecture, activity, quiz, a review, and an exam. And then, you know, you have that project as the culmination, but it's not really the process that's being looked at or how things all bleed into one project. But if you look at the unit taught with the project-based learning, you might have different things that can occur throughout the stages. So you launch the project, and then the students can engage with authentic tasks designed to provide the context for the learning. So typically the students start with a problem, right? And the students have to ask questions to answer or find a solution to this problem. And it can be many different things. And then the next thing that they're doing is, it could be any one of these things. It could be one, it could be multiple things in this one, but they could be doing activities, workshops, lectures. So not just listening to lectures from the teacher, but also giving each other the opportunity to present a lecture. And by lecture, I don't mean anything big, but just have the students present their knowledge. Them understanding what they know and don't know really helps them work through what they still have to learn. It could also include homework, research, going to the lab. And then there is typically a benchmark. And the benchmark can look like many different things. But after the benchmark and throughout the process of the project, there's always going to be reflection. And I'm going to go more into reflection shortly when I talk about the features in detail. but reflections are a key component of project-based learning, because when students reflect on their work, they're thinking about the past, the present, and the future. So it's basically KWL. What do you know? What do you want to know? And what have you learned? And this is a really important process for them, because if you're just telling them the connections, then maybe they're just passively accepting what they're being told. But if they're actually having to think about what they have learned and connect it, then that's when they start to really think about the language in a different way, in my opinion. And then you have a couple more opportunities for different activities. And this could be simulations, discussions, modeling, reading, interviews, quizzes. So you don't have to do all of these things for each category, and you don't even have to do them in this order, but these are suggestions of things that could occur, and when they could occur and at different times. So, but as you can see, the benchmark and the reflection are there again. And then the last one, creating, feedback, building, writing, preparing, drafts. So this last one, you're going to be creating throughout, but this creating stage is almost to the culmination of their project. They should have substantial stuff to show you. It's not just theoretical anymore. They're not just doing investigations or discussions anymore. This is when they start to see the project take shape, and know that it's going to be something. You know, and then you're giving feedback, not just at this stage, but throughout all the stages, because even though project-based learning is student-centered, it doesn't mean that the teacher does not serve an important role as the facilitator. So the teacher needs to be aware of, you know, what they are facilitating and what they are encouraging the students to do and how to guide them so that they achieve the best results for their project. And then you've got the culminating event and presentation. So this is an authentic demonstration of deeper learning. So this could be a gallery like presentation where they present to the university or to their entire class or to their entire level everything that they've learned, and they get to show off their work. This is when the students can be proud and present what they've learned and what they've worked so hard for during the course of that project. And then, of course, at the end, again, a reflection, because even though they might have finished, it doesn't mean that they are completely done. They need to think about how far they've come, because for students, sometimes it's difficult for them to see their own progress. And for them to take this little bit of time and reflect and think, then it really helps them see how far they've come over this period. So for me personally, I tend to not do the traditional way of teaching in the classroom. There are always going to be instances where, you know, the traditional way is just sometimes easier, but for me, I really enjoy the aspects of getting the students to do for themselves. So in every class that I teach, I always try to incorporate some project in some way, even if it's not for the entire semester. I do try to make sure that they have sufficient time to work on something and connect it to the content and the language that we've learned in the classroom. So these are just some things to keep in mind. As I've been working with project-based learning for quite a few years now, and I didn't always teach in this manner, but I've discovered that I really enjoy giving the students the freedom and then guiding them. But these are some of the things that I've learned. One, project-based learning is not always easy, and it's not always easy to see a clear path to what you want to do. But projects are the evidence of productive skills. So the productive skills are writing and speaking. But the reading and listening skills, the passive skills, those are demonstrated throughout the process. This could be in terms of when you introduce content that's connecting to the project through readings, through listenings, different things like that. Projects need to be topic-based and connected to themes and topics of the level or grade or class that you're teaching. So you don't have to build a project completely from scratch without any support. We are basing a lot of the projects that we do here around themes from units from a specific book. And so they connect to the book and real world problems. And that's how we introduce them into the classroom. They need to be aligned to the weights established on the grading framework. So if you have specific grading criteria and you think that it could be impossible to do this because of your specific grading framework, it's a challenge, but it's not impossible. You just have to find ways to connect the two things and make it work for your particular situation, whether it's in primary school, high schools, or universities, or adult education. Projects need to be developed and assessed throughout the different stages. So this is kind of the difference between the traditional model versus the project. The traditional model, you have timed assessments throughout, but the end product is the only thing that's assessed in the traditional method. For project-based learning, the different stages that you get to are going to be assessed. So you might be assessing a draft, and you might be assessing how students worked in the groups. You might be assessing a discussion that they have about some homework that they had to complete. So it all just depends on what you choose to assess, but it should be assessed throughout, not just at the end, because that's one of the key differences. Projects should reflect professional aspects or products and intercultural skills. So with any language, culture is going to come into play. And how students interact with the culture of that language should also be thought about in the project. The other thing is there must be specific deliverables on specific dates. It can be very easy to allow projects to go along at their own pace, but in reality, the teacher has to be very organized to make this successful. Because if the teacher is not organized, then the students won't know how much time they have to complete a certain part of the process, or what's coming next and what they need to be thinking about for the future. Some students are very good at thinking ahead, and some students haven't really developed this skill, but can through the use of this process. So it's really the responsibility of the teacher to make sure that the students are aware of specific deliverable dates so that they can be prepared and ready. The last thing on this one is projects should be reflective so that students can think about the process and understand what they know. I've mentioned this several times before. Reflection is crucial for projects. So understanding what they know, what they still need or want to learn, and what they have learned, the KWL concept. Oh. All right, so the major features that of PBL in the classrooms, And these are things that I've identified. PBL can encompass many things, but these are the 5 things that I'm going to focus on and tell a little bit more about. So PBL should be student-centered, should be reflective, it should be collaborative, process-oriented, and interconnected. So student-centered. Student-centered project work creates a sense of ownership in students. And by doing this, it increases student motivation. Students must be able to use their judgment when answering a driving question to avoid the project feeling like following a set of directions. So some of the classroom is going to be a little bit free. The teacher is facilitating, so they know what they want to get out of their students. But the reality is that sometimes the students have to be allowed to make mistakes. They have to be allowed to discover what they're lacking so that they can feel a sense of ownership for what they are doing. Students can have input and they can have some control over many aspects of a project. So control can come in many forms, but these are a few examples. Questions that they generate, they can have control over the resources that they will use to find answers to their questions. They can also have a say in group work. If they are assigned tasks, they can decide amongst themselves who does what, the roles that they play. And then the products that they will create. In the end, they are responsible for what they are turning in. More advanced students may even select the topic and the nature of the project itself so that they can have more say. They can also write their own driving question and decide how they want to investigate it, demonstrate what they have learned, and how they will share their work. So this more advanced students could also be seen as master's students. Typically with a thesis, this is a key example of, students taking their learning into their own hands. They are thinking about what interests them in the classroom, and then they are taking it and running with it. They are doing for themselves, creating their own questions that they have to answer, creating their own instruments. So in a lot of ways, a thesis is a project, and it's all about the student and what they create and what they bring to it. Okay. So next is just a couple of illustrations. In a student-centered classroom, the one on the bottom right is going to be how it's formed. The teacher is kind of outside watching and keeping an eye on them while they are doing all the steps. Whereas in a traditional model, the teacher might be doing the questioning, planning, and researching and allowing the students to create, improve, and present. So 2 different models. All right, so reflective. I've already mentioned several of these, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Throughout the project, it's not just the students, but it's students and the teachers that are reflecting. They should reflect on what they're learning, how they're learning, and why they're learning. And it's not just for students, as I said, it's also the teachers. Teachers need to reflect on what they're doing in the classroom and how they're doing it. Are they achieving their own student learning outcomes for their students? Are they guiding the students in a way that will get them to that process and product eventually? So what does reflection do? And how can you do it? You can use journals, formative assessments, discussions at project checkpoints, public presentations of student work process so far. And you can reflect on process, stages, activities, different parts along the way. It's collaborative, so it's not just teacher and student, it's student and student groups, discussions about projects, themes from the class, It could be community collaboration. If they're going out and doing interviews in the community, it could also be collaboration and discussion with teachers. So there's multiple things. Two more things, I believe. It's process-oriented. As I've said many times, step-by-step process includes everything leading to the end product. So all things in the classroom should be connected. Which brings me to my next thing. It's interconnected. It makes meaningful connections between what you're reading, what you're listening to, what you're discussing, and everything is leading to that final thing. The key thing here is buy-in, getting student buy-in and teacher buy-in. So I believe that that is all the time I have. I have some references at the end of my presentation, and I am open for any questions that you have now. Okay, so if there are no questions, should I go? Okay. All right. I don't know if you can, oh, there you are. Okay. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope that this has been helpful. I think that the slides are going to be shared. So if you have any questions in the future, the link is there. So good luck and thank you.